What can you do when you grow up, right?
Okay.
That you can make a difference.
Well, as it is, and it's honestly, I feel this way. But society is like I mean, it's like, you know those little things they have for the mice where they go through around a circle and there's little blocks for it and everything. Well, society is like that. They'll let you go as far as you want, but as soon as you start asking too many questions and you're ready to change, boom. Ain't no secret, but the world is bad shit.
And as Hoover had said, there would be no black messiah that would unite black people.
My name is Tupac Shakur, and I attend Tampa High School. I'm 17 years old. In Baltimore, my high school years, going to the School of Performing Arts. Then, before that, I was in New York. That's where I grew up. We moved out of New York because of my mother's choices, you know, and she couldn't keep her job because of her choices. It was like they figured out who she was, and she couldn't keep her job. That should be illegal. So she lost her job, and of course, we were like stranded in New York. So we moved to Baltimore, which was total ignorance town to me because it gets me upset to talk about it. Baltimore has the highest rate of teenage pregnancy, the highest rate of AIDS within the black community, the highest rate of teens killing teens, the highest rate of teenage suicide, and the highest rate of blacks killing blacks in Baltimore, Maryland. And this is where we chose to live. So as soon as I got there, being the person I am, I said, no, I'm changing this. So I started a Stop the Killing campaign and safe sex campaign and AIDS prevention campaign and everything. And then I came back and I felt like I did a lot of good. I did good things and everything. Came back. The second week I was in California, I got a call and two of my friends were shot dead in the head. Two of the friends that were working with me shot dead in the head. And it's just like, why try? Because this is what happens. But I still try, you know?
I think people were just drawn to him right away. He had charisma that was astounding. I think people just wanted him to like them and wanted to be his friend and wanted to hang with him and wanted to be around him. He just had that kind of magnetism that he came in with. That was nothing we gave him. That was all factory equipment with him. He had a fantastic smile, lit up his whole face, beautiful eyes, and when he fastened them on you, whatever was in those eyes, that was where you went.
The way the American media presents Tupac Shakur, they present him as just a gang member, not an activist, and just a rapper that was, into negative activities. What Tupac really was a lifelong committed left-wing activist. Starting from age 13 when a Reverend Herbert Daltrey asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he said a revolutionary. By the age of 17 years old, he was elected as the youngest national chairman of a group called the New African Panthers. Yeah. They wanted to replicate the Black Panthers. They were the young adult organization inside the New African People's Organization, which was also active in 8 cities nationwide. Tupac was an intellectual prodigy, according to people, that researched other people that researched his life and looked into his libraries and all. He read hundreds and hundreds of PhD level books before he was out of his teen years. He rewrote Shakespeare plays and directed and starred in them when he was still in high school. He rewrote them with modern language. He was also, I think, an incredibly evolved person. I think enough people sensed from his emotional lyrics and some of his other talks, when he wasn't in that persona, they sensed what incredible emotional depth he had and what brilliance he had. That's why he's beloved internationally.
Well, I think the first thing I would say about the truth about Tupac is that he wasn't nothing but the truth. He was the truth, He was one of ours. We raised him, He was raised among Black Panthers, Black Liberation Army members, and so a lot of what he learned through us. The name Shakur is the thankful, or those who are thankful to the Creator for all that He gives us. The first Shakur out of our clan was Salahuddin Shakur, father of Zayd, Malik Shakur, and Lumumba Shakur. Yes. he was the first one. He was a comrade of Malcolm X, brother of Malcolm X, a member of the Nation of Islam at the same time that Malcolm was. He left the nation a little before Malcolm did, but that's where the name originated from.
Say, cool, your son, Gaddafi, was a member of the Outlaws, right?
That's right.
And that was Tupac's crew. You know, growing up in Oakland, I used to run with Pac. You know, he used to have a place by the lake, and we used to open up for Digital Underground when he was with Digital Underground. Did those two grow up together? Or
yes, they grew up very close together. They were really like brothers. Afeni Shakur and Yasmin Fula were very close. They were both party members, and they raised the kids together. Most of the kids grew up together. All my children grew up with our comrades. All of them, even to the day, call each other cousins and brothers. And if you meet them now, they're like their children call me uncle.
Okay.
Or my Afeni's daughter just called me the other day and called Uncle Sekou.
Uncle Sekou.
So yeah, they grew up very close together, and they was always together. I got pictures of them when they were like, he was like 6 or 7 years older than Pac. I mean, Pac was 6 or 7 years older than
Gaddafi. Well, yeah,
you call him Gaddafi. I call him Yaki.
Yaki, okay.
But he was like a big brother to him. He always was, you know. And Pac had the benefit of being raised by and around most of the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party, you know. So he was politically educated at a very young age. You know, some of the gangster stuff that he went out into, that came out later in his life. He was one of the sharpest youngsters I ever met. Even at 10, 11, 12, 13, I remember getting letters from him when I first went away in 1982, 83, and you would think he was 17, 18 years old then, and he was only like 11, 12 years old, something like that then, you know. So he had a very clear understanding of what was going on in the world and why it was going on.
You think he used the gangsters? I'm just me. You know. Do you think he used the gangster stuff as a lure to get people into hearing the other food he had to offer?
His business manager told me, Watani Tayahimba, a former Los Angeles Black Panther, who was also National Security Director for the New African People's Organization, he confirmed to me that Tupac took on a fake gangster persona in order to appeal to gangs and then politicize them. And that was part of the Bloods versus Crips peace truce movement. Former Black Panthers and other black activists had gotten the notorious gangs that were warring against each other, the Bloods and the Crips, to stop fighting each other and to fight racism. So slowly but surely, these gang peace truces started to spread throughout California and then across the country.
Well, yes, to a point. I think that those who be in charge of the music industry didn't want to push certain stuff, and other stuff they would push. So to be financially successful, you had to put certain things out rather than other things, because that was what would sell, and that's what they would push. You know. So yeah, I think so.
You and Pac are brothers, but you have different parents?
We have different mothers, and my father, you know, raised us together for the time when he was free.
Oh,
so
okay.
We were raised as brothers.
Since Pac was 3, you guys were in the same household? From 3 until like what age?
Like from when he was 4 to 5, I think.
Okay, so for a few years.
We bonded, but then I went back to stay with my moms in Queens. My father, Fanny, Pac, my sister, they were in Harlem. Okay. You know, at that time.
Okay.
You know, my pops is a revolutionary. You know, he's a political prisoner, and he was on FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. So he was underground. When he went underground, the family scattered.
Okay, and your father is?
Dr. Michel'le Shakur. Also heavily involved in the revolutionary movement that was going on with the Black Panthers and the BLA. And
the BLA is the
Black Liberation Army.
Okay. So was he officially a Black Panther, or just he was just sort of affiliated with them?
Oh yeah. I mean, and some.
So your dad was with Afeni at the time?
Afeni, yes.
Afeni, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He was Afeni. Afeni is a Black Panther as well. So this was this was a household where both parents were heavily into the movement.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
My mother was a Black Panther, and she was really involved in the movement, you know, just black people bettering themselves and things like that. My father was a hustler, a street hustler, you know. I think he, you know, sold drugs and everything. And how did they get together is beyond me, but he just saw her as a woman doing something and like, you know. But my mother it's like she actually did take me through life. You know, when I discovered some, first I rebelled against her because she was in the movement and we never spent time together because she was always speaking and going to colleges and everything. And then after that was over, it was more time spent with me and we were both just like, you're my mother, and she was like, you're my son, and what do we do? So then she was really close with me and really strict almost. But now I can see how it paid off.
Afeni Shakur, and I said this, I've said this my whole life. So this is not just because she has passed away and has joined the ancestors. Is the strongest black woman I ever knew, and the most beautiful black woman I ever knew. I met Afeni the first day I walked into the Black Panther office. I came from the Bronx and traveled out to Brooklyn. The Panther office in Harlem wasn't even open yet. So I show up at the Panther office, we're sitting in the back, and I'm looking at all these beautiful brothers and sisters with their Panther uniforms and their berets and their afros and army fatigue jackets, and these older brothers and sisters, but older than me, because I was 15 years old. Right. They were 18, 19, 21, 22 years old. The brother who's running the meeting is explaining the Panther 10-point program.
The 10-point program created in 1966. Point number one, we want freedom. We want the power to determine the destiny of our black and oppressed communities. What's wrong with that? Point number two, we want full employment for our people. Point number three, we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our black and oppressed communities. Point number four, we want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. Point number five, we want education for our people to expose us to the true nature of the decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in present-day society. Point number six, we want completely free health care for all black and oppressed people. Point number seven, we want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people, other people of color, and all oppressed people inside the United States. Point number eight, we want an immediate end to all wars of aggression. Point number nine, we want freedom for all black and poor, oppressed people now held in the U.S. federal, state, county, city, and military prisons and jails. We want trial by a jury of peers for all persons charged with so-called crimes under the laws of this country. And we up to number 10. And this is what people were asking for. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, and people's community control of modern technology. Modern technology.
And he gets to point number 5, which is about, we want a education that teaches us our true history and the true nature of this decadent American society. Right. I'm not paying attention to what's being said. And nothing in there about killing a white dude, right? I jump on, I was like, choose me, brother. Oh, me, I kill a white dude right now. Calls me to the front of the office, and he reaches down into the desk. And my heart's pounding. I was like, look how far out he's reached. He's going to give me a big damn gun. And he hands me a stack of books. Autobiography of Malcolm X, Wretched of the Earth by Franz Fanon, Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver. And I'm thinking, this must be a trick. He's putting me to the test. I said, excuse me, brother, I thought you were going to arm me. He said, excuse me, young brother, I just did. And after the meeting was over, Afeni is sitting near the front. She's one of the leaders of the chapter, and she says, "How old are you?" Now, when you're 15, you think putting your age up a year is a big thing, right? And I said, I'm 16 and a half. And she said, you look like you're about 13, 14 years old. Go home. And I was like, no, I want to be a Black Panther. She said, I'm telling you to go home. And I was ducking her and refused to go. And she says, okay then, I'm going to keep my eye on you. And from that moment on, she became my big sister in the organization.
My mother was in the Black Panther Party. She was like at a high position, which was like unheard of, because of course there was sexism even in the Panthers. So, and my stepfather at the time, Michel'le Shakur, he was also like a well-known like revolutionary. True. All of my roots to the struggle are real deep. And then my godfather, Geronimo Pratt, you know, he was like had a top official rank position with the Panthers on the West Coast.
Right, and we just mentioned he's of course serving a life sentence right now. Your mom was carrying you when she went to jail the first time.
Yes,
that's a very interesting story in itself. What happened to her? Why was she in jail?
Because, like, you know, there's racism. So when the Panthers hit, the government panicked, and they had a thing called a COINTELPRO.
Students have said to me, why did you all give up? And I've often said that I don't think the movement stopped voluntarily. And so I want to ask the question about the government's COINTELPRO, we call it COINTELPRO, but it's counterintelligence program that was directed at that era and the individuals who were operating in that era and the groups that were most active in that era, and ask each of you, how did the COINTELPRO program, and you can of course elaborate on it a little bit more and explain it a little bit more than I have right now, how did that program affect both of you?
COINTELPRO is a very significant thing, and you should, again, if you don't know about it, you should learn about it. It's 1,000 times more significant than, say, Watergate. I mention Watergate because the expose of COINTELPRO and of Watergate was just about exactly at the same time. In comparison to COINTELPRO, Watergate was a Tea Party. The only reason why anybody pays attention to Watergate is the targets were rich, powerful people. I mean, the break-in of the Democratic Party headquarters, you know, nobody even knows what it was for, you know. It was a couple of sort of, you know, crooks who were gathered together for some unknown purpose who did nothing, you know. I mean, but it became a huge scandal because they were powerful people they were attacking. Let's turn to COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO, which was revealed at the same time, very same time, not very little in the press or anywhere else. It came out in the courts, you know, Freedom of Information Act, mostly courts just released documents. Well, it turns out that since the Eisenhower administration and right up till Nixon, the government had been it's not a little group of people put together by Nixon when he was drunk or something, but the federal government through 4 administrations were running a terrorist program against dissent. Literally a terrorist program, major terrorist program. I mean, it started, began against the Communist Party back in the 50s. Under Kennedy, it really took off. The Puerto Rican nationalists, other groups, and so on, what they called black nationalists quickly became a target. Panthers in particular were devastated by it. The women's movement as a whole was attacked as soon as it began to come into existence. The New Left across the board. In fact, there was virtually nothing that was left out. Maybe the Panthers were the most, you know, the most viciously attacked. At the time, we now know a lot from released documents. At the time, according to the FBI, the Panthers had 800 members. But they were devoting enormous efforts to destroy the party, because it was doing things like running free breakfast programs in churches and things like that. And it reached the level of outright political assassination. The literal Gestapo-style political assassination. The person who was, you know, the most extreme case in the COINTELPRO records was the assassination of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton.
Let's talk about that, because were you with Fred Hampton the night he was murdered?
I left the apartment at 2 a.m. I woke up from a sleep, dead sleep, and went to my parents' house. By the time I got home, I got the phone call that the raid had happened. 4 a.m., the Chicago police, under the direction of the FBI, had burst in. William O'Neill, our head of security, was an FBI plant.
He's an informant.
Yes, he was much more than an informant. Yeah. He was Asian provocateur is what we call the things that he did. We do a whole book about just the stuff that he did. But regarding Fred, he gave them a layout of the apartment to show where Fred's bedroom was and what he would be. But this is the thing, you'll see it in that book.
Yeah.
They were so afraid of Fred, they killed him twice. Okay. At the end of the raid, Fred was still alive. And one of the Panthers who was in the front room being taken away heard one of the cops say, "He's still alive." Bam, bam. He's good and dead now. They put 2 bullets in his head. He would have died anyway, because the night before, O'Neill put 6 times the lethal dose of Seconal into his Kool-Aid. Fred never regained full consciousness during the raid. Let me tell you about the Rainbow Coalition. Now, people hear the term Rainbow Coalition, and you think, who do you think started the Rainbow Coalition?
Jesse Jackson.
Fred Hampton.
Fred Hampton, and an Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Fred saw this happening in Chicago. There was the Young Lords, which had been a street gang, which became political. There was Rising Up Angry, a group of what was called greasers on the north side of Chicago. And then there were the Young Patriots, hillbillies. Hillbillies. They wore berets with little Confederate flags on them, okay? And our field marshal, Bob Lee, went into uptown on the north side of Chicago, hillbilly country, to talk to them about why we should be working together. You can see this on YouTube on the American Revolution 2. You can see this whole thing that I'm talking about. He goes into this meeting and he says, you all are dealing with rats and roaches and so are we. You're getting your butts kicked by the police and so are we. We should be working together. And at the end of the meeting, Mike Gray, who was the director of the film, asked one of these old hillbillies, well, what do you think about what this Panther said? And I'm going to paraphrase. Well, if them Black Panthers going to support us, I guess we should support them Black Panthers. A week later, Bob Lee was in the area doing some organizing. He was stopped and arrested by the police. The Patriots found out. They came out in droves, men, women with their kids, and surrounded the police car and made them let Bob go. Yeah. And that is one of the reasons that Fred was destroyed and the party was destroyed. We were working with gangs, street gangs in Chicago, the Blackstone Rangers, the Disciples, the young vice lords and what have you. But then we're bringing in all these other people of color and white people, progressive white people, and even hillbilly white people to make them realize why we should work together. That was why the party was targeted by COINTELPRO.
Black was one of the key factors that was frightening, but also having a philosophy of socialism was also a factor that was very frightening, because the example the Black Panther Party set in its socialist programs was a threat to the structure of capitalism in America and in the world, in fact. All of those different groups imitated the Black Panther Party in their thing. The Brown Berets, they armed themselves to protect their community. AIM, the American Indian movement, or what we call Red Beret, they did the same thing. The Young Lords, they did the same thing. And the White Panthers, which people don't probably even know exists, they did the same thing. But the White Patriot Party, other groups did the same thing. They armed themselves and used the Black Panther Party as a template to do programs in their communities. That was the threat. The threat of all of these different people from all of these different communities working together. And as people were joining, there were people leaving.
And a lot of those people joining, we all know now, and you came to know, were cops. And in fact, you told me that the guy that actually founds the Panther Baltimore chapter is a member of the National Security Agency.
Yes, the Maryland State chapter yes, his name was Warren Hart, and he worked for the National Security Agency and formulated the apparatus that became the Baltimore Panthers.
And the idea is
the Panthers.
The Panther Party will be a magnet to attract militants, and you'll get to know who are the militants.
And get them locked up and get them arrested, and some of them actually disappeared, or one of my friends actually was murdered as a result of this guy.
Now, this is, as we all know now, or anyone that follows this, this was part of a national campaign, COINTELPRO,
yes,
which involved the National Security Agency, the FBI, and many local police forces.
Military intelligence, etc. And
all targeting black militancy.
Every police force, state police, the local police, etc. The first book that I wrote is called The Greatest Threat. One of the things that happened was that up in New York, Malcolm X, when Malcolm X was assassinated and he was dying on the stage, there was a guy bent over him giving him mouth-to-mouth respiration. And this guy's name was Gene Roberts, and this guy was Malcolm X's chief bodyguard. After Malcolm X had died, this guy ended up joining the Black Panther Party in New York. And of course his credentials was that he was Malcolm X's bodyguard. Yo, who else could you trust? You got to trust Malcolm X's bodyguard, right? He joined the Black Panther Party and he incited a conspiracy that the leadership of the Black Panther Party never participated in New York, never participated in. But they used his incitement and they locked up 21 leaders of the New York Black Panther Party, the captain from the Jamaica Queens, captain from the Bronx, captain from Manhattan, so on, right? And they locked up 20, including Tupac's mother, locked up 21 members. They kept them in jail for for about 2 years. They had them under $100,000 bail each.
Faney was the first of the Panther 21 to get out on bail as people of conscience came and started to raise their bail money. $100,000, you know, is a lot today if a black kid goes to prison. In 1969, that might as well have been a $10 million bail. And we unanimously voted that Faney should be the first one out because she was such a dynamic organizer, a great speaker, and she would be sympathetic because she was a woman, one of the 2 women arrested. And then I was the second person out on bail. So for a lot for the first few months until other members of the Panther 21 came out, it was Faney and I going everywhere to speak, Faney and I really understanding what we were up against, not in terms of just the case, but what was happening, you know, within the Panther Party. Faney defended herself. It turned out to be one of the things I believe that one of the reasons, if not the reason, that we won the trial. Because of Faney's opening statement to the jury, her closing statement to the jury, the way she cross-examined witnesses, especially one of the undercover cops that had infiltrated the Panther Party, really exposed what was going on and really humanized who we were to those 12 men and women that were sitting on the jury.
Then the jury went out. In a half an hour, they came back and they exonerated all of them. Why? Because this guy, Gene Roberts, that was bent over Malcolm X, was a actual officer of New York City Police Department, boss, was the thing. And his job was to infiltrate black militant organizations and disrupt and disband them. And he brought in fake dynamite and he brought in fake plans to commit sabotage and that kind of stuff. And all this was his doing, and he was always a police officer the whole entire time. And once the jury discovered that, they let everybody out. But it cost millions of dollars in bail money and years of people's lives, because people spent 2 years, and that was just bail money, the lawyers, the legal fees, etc. But that particular incident there, say for one, caused a split in the Black Panther Party, caused the New York chapter in New Jersey, I believe it was, split away from Oakland, you know, Chicago, New Orleans, Baltimore, etc., it caused a split that ended up leading to conflict between the Black Panthers.
FBI documents that were stolen out of an FBI office in 1971 by activists, by left-wing activists, found thousands and thousands of pages supporting what the counterintelligence program was. And once they got those documents out, it showed how the FBI manufactured this rivalry between the East Coast versus the West Coast Black Panthers. Then I found that with this East Coast versus West Coast rap rivalry, they used the same tactics. There was anonymous letters going back and forth. There was strangers making outrageous accusations, and so yeah, Tupac started believing some of this stuff at first, and then by the end of his life, he didn't believe it anymore. He realized he had a song called "Against All Odds," where he says, "Let me tell you about this snitch." An FBI agent named Haitian Jack knew he was working for the Feds, of course, Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. Set me up and wet me up. Yeah. And the set him up was for the sexual assault scene, and that wet me up was, of course, shot him at New York recording studio lobby. I have a doctor's affidavit copied in my book showing that there was 2 bullet entry wounds in the back of the skull and 2 exit wounds in the front of the skull. Yeah. And he just those bullets barely missed his brain. That was a clear murder attempt. But Tupac was having all kinds of problems at that time. Financially, legally, obviously, they kept arresting him and I think that was part of their same strategy they used against the Panthers, what's called the harassment arrest strategy that was found in FBI documents. Business manager Watani Tayahimba told me that he first felt solidly sure that there was an attack on Tupac after the Marin Fest shooting, when strangers punched Tupac for no reason and then shot at him. Then police arrested Tupac instead of the people that were attacking him. But anyway, so Watani says he understood that there must be, FBI intelligence, police intelligence attack on Tupac from that point on.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about what COINTELPRO was, only in terms of the FBI, but the concept of counterintelligence was much broader than the FBI. We focused in on the FBI because they were the most visible and the things they did were the closest to us. But for example, let's take a city like Los Angeles. There's the FBI racial squad that's operating to get rid of black radicals and revolutionaries, and they focus in on the Black Panthers. In the Los Angeles Police Department, there is the criminal conspiracy squad, and their focus is to get rid of black radicals, in particular Black Panthers. So they work together. And in the Central Intelligence Agency, they have their own particular units doing the same thing. In the Department of Defense Intelligence, they have their units doing things. In the National Security Agency, they have their units doing the same thing. And so what we didn't know, we said, yes, it was a police state and they were out to get us, but what we had no idea was the amount of agencies and the amount of money and the amount of technology that was used to destroy us. But just look at one particular individual, a young man named Elmer Geronimo Pratt, who was discharged from the United States Army in, I think, about 1968, took his GI Bill, went to UCLA in a program called High Potential to get a college degree. He met another Black Panther named Alprentice Bunchy Carter in that program. Carter recruited him into the Black Panther Party, and within 7 months, Alprentice Carter was murdered on the UCLA campus after a black student meeting by Carter and John Huggins were murdered on the UCLA campus. The FBI agent who wrote about it, a man named Wes Swearingen, who has subsequently revealed a lot of his information in a book called FBI Secrets, says the agents came back, the 2 FBI agents plus the 2 blacks in the US organization who were their infiltrators, came back upset, saying that wasn't supposed to happen. There wasn't supposed to be any shooting on the campus. And the reason why? They weren't supposed to be killed on the campus because some white students might have been killed in the gunfire. They were supposed to have been killed, but somewhere else. So that's just one little January 1969 incident, an example of counterintelligence work within the Black Panther Party, against the Black Panther Party, and the purpose was not only to kill the leadership of a particular branch, it was very powerful, but to also instigate conflict and warfare between two different or you might say rival black activist nationalist groups. Some of the groups, for example, that the FBI was spying on, infiltrating, and collecting information on for its so-called agitator index. And if you're on the agitator index, certain things would happen to you under different circumstances, but these are the organizations they looked at. American Nazi Party, Anti-Vietnam Activists, Black Nationalists, Black Panther Party, Communists, Congress of Racial Equality, Ku Klux Klan, Latin American. That's there. This is out of the Select Committee report on intelligence activities, otherwise known as the Church Committee. Minutemen, Nation of Islam, National States Right Party, Progressive Labor Party, nationalist groups advocating independence for Puerto Rico, Revolutionary Action Movement, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Students for a Democratic Society, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Socialist Workers Party, Workers' World Party, and then there's another one called Miscellaneous. And there were over and over, people would visit you, people would interact with you, they would send letters to you. I got letters all the time, and I was so busy I didn't read most of them, but they tried to disrupt your relationships with other people. For example, I got a letter that said, "Dear Kathleen, you are such a nice person. I hate to be the one to break this bad news, but I just want you to know your husband is having an affair with a white woman who lives at such and such and such a street," and it had an address. And then it was signed, "A soul sister." So I said, if you won't tell me who you are, why should I believe you? And I threw it away. I mentioned to William Kunstler, very, very dynamic lawyer, that incident, just in passing, and he said, "Yeah, my wife got those kind of letters too, but she believed them all."
So anyhow, then I went to Los Angeles in 1979, and an editor there began sending me over to cover the police commission. And so I began writing about the LAPD's Public Disorder Intelligence Division. That was their Red Squad. And I understood that they were doing stuff they ought not to be doing, and it was apparently a pretty big unit and somewhat out of control, but I figured, this is police falderall and nobody has a control over them until an event. I go to a social event for a retiring LA police officer, and Police Chief Daryl Gates, he signals everybody to go away, and he says in the sometimes crude language of cops something to the effect of, "Perhaps I have an affinity for large-bosomed, red-headed women." And he then begins to unload on a blind date that I have been on with a woman I've now been married to for more than 32 years. What we ate, critiqued the champagne that I ordered on its likely success at getting some further intimacy. But I went home that night and went, oh my God, it's true. Everything I've been hearing, that they're spying on city council members and politicians and that he has a list of who's had affairs with who, it's probably all true. He had officers undercover all around the world. There are at least 2 officers who each spent 20 years in the Communist Party. When I was about to reveal that, I got shut down by the LA Times.
Okay, and part of what you were revealing, he had like hundreds of people, right?
He had, we don't know how many he had. I finally got Zev Yaroslavsky, who's now county supervisor, to get the nerve.
Sorry to interrupt you. Again, we're not talking FBI. This
talking
is
about LAPD.
LAPD, a local municipal police force, hundreds of agents undercover, and some of them internationally.
The crimes that they found, none. We couldn't find any evidence whatsoever, except when the police did them. The Black Panthers had as their treasurer an undercover LAPD officer. They had $800. That's how wealthy the Black Panthers were now. He stole it.
But in some of your work, there are murders that it seems lead back to the police.
There is the last big story I did on this before the LA Times shut me down was about how a guy who they had been pursuing undercover for a long time was murdered, standing here, police officers here, right literally next to him. He didn't see a thing. But the principal suspect in the murder turns up dead a couple days later in the LA River. The LA Times diverted attention from the truth of the matter that I had reported and which I was about to move to the next stage of, which was showing murders, undercover officers overseas. And when Daryl Gates finally lost his job, he wrote an autobiography, and in it, he not only bragged about spying on everybody, including business executives he named, but he bragged, and I had officers undercover in Moscow and Havana.
Did he have any in the LA Times?
Well, one of the things was the files of one of the officers I undercovered, he'd appeared in some news stories, had disappeared from the paper, and I proved that this officer had gotten a job at the LA Times and had an LA Times ID card that shouldn't let him into the paper itself, but into an ancillary office. But once you got one of those cards, you can get in. He could have then walked to the library, asked for his clip file, and it was right during this period when it was checked out and it disappeared. Now, I was able to reconstruct that file through a lot of hard work and prove that he had been in the paper.
So why does the LA Times protect Gates?
Well, the family that owned the LA Times are people who, I mean, they're about as close to being actual fascists as you have in America.
Once he was in jail, though, they put him in solitary confinement for 10 out of the 11 months. Yeah. They used all forms of tactics that are called by Amnesty International penal coercion tactics to mess his head up. Then when he got out of jail, he was with Death Row Records, who I argue and show evidence of that continued these tactics to mess his head up. And only when he was finally getting away from Death Row Records did he get back into some of his activist lyrics, and he had started his own record company, his own film company, and had fired the real head of Death Row Records, a guy named Dave Kenner, a white lawyer, and within 9 days of firing him, of course, he was killed. Yeah. And now I argue that Death Row Records was a U.S. intelligence front company. Yeah. And I say that based on the fact that a high-level white Los Angeles police officer found dozens and dozens of his fellow police officers at all levels of Death Row Records. And when he went to his superiors to ask what were they doing there, they said you can consider them covert agents. And one of their goals was to aid in the murder of Tupac Shakur. Yeah. And of course they had some other goals also, which was partly to end the Bloods versus Crips peace truce. They did see it, but there wasn't much they could do about it. That's the problem. They just didn't realize how much U.S. intelligence, how many resources they would put into targeting Tupac.
And I came to California to escape that violence that I escaped New York for. Then I went to Baltimore, escaped Baltimore for, came to California. Come to Marin City, and there's skinheads violence. So everybody went to this party, and I was working, and I was going to go to the party right after I got off work, me and my friends. So we got off work, we're on our way to the party, we're laughing and joking, just going through, and we see our friend Jonas, who's white, and he's telling us there was a fight at the party. And I was like, what happened? He said the skinheads came and called the black people niggas and made them, they said they had to leave, and of course there was fight. I was like, oh my God. So we were sitting there, they went home, we were sitting there talking and everything, and me and my friends just like, this couldn't happen in the 60s, you know, let's figure out what to do. And he just said, I know, we'll start the Black Panthers again. So we're starting the Black Panthers, but we're doing it more to fit our views, you know, less violent and more silent, you know, more knowledge to help. You know, what we really want to do is get the pride back in the black community, because I feel like if you can't respect yourself, then you can't respect your race, then you can't respect another's race. So what we're doing is starting the Black Panthers again in Marin City, just getting first teaching pride, and then teaching education, and then we'll see where it goes from there. And also as a defense mechanism for the skinheads, because that's wrong, and I hate to feel helpless. And so skinheads hate black people, and I'm gonna be there. I have this vision of just us growing and them decreasing, because that's how knowledge works. It's contagious, you know. And so I'm talking to a lot of the ex-members of the Panthers from the '60s, and they're helping me because they're less violent. They're, you know, they've learned. So, and they did a lot of good things in the past, and we can do a lot of good things. So since my mother was an ex-Panther, and talking to Geronimo Pratt and a lot of ex-minister defenses and everything, so we're going to do a lot of good. I feel like we're going to do a lot of good.
So you went to go live with your mom at one point, and at what point did you and Pac get reunited?
We reconnected in the Bay. I had just gotten out the Army, and I went to Oakland to you know, set up my new camp on the West Coast.